there's like Seems about right. Yeah.
So that mic's on. Yeah, if you don't mind.
So quickly, guys, the mics, green light means on, red light means off. You can tap the button to switch it between on and off. If you do not hold the button door, you'll turn the mic over.
Okay.
Do you have to do anything?
No.
What?
The only thing you should make sure of is to speak into the mic during the debate because it's being live streamed and that's how we get audio into the stream.
But it's on. I don't have to turn it on to speak.
You shouldn't have to touch it now. If you see a green light, you're good to go. You can leave that.
They'll all be on the whole
Debate, so any whispered asides you will be, that seems good.
But it's important.
If I push it over a little bit.
On this point, like if someone from the audience is speaking and you move out of the podium and start speaking to them, the online audience won't hear a thing, even if your voice is loud. So if you can stick with the mics.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm short.
Do you have a guest list?
We're both short. That's
Could we
fine.
see a
It's fine.
guest list?
Yeah.
All right. Well, can we do the sound check so I can just run back and make sure I've got my, run through my script.
Happy with the mics? Do you want to hear these guys talking anymore, or you go to the levels?
Krishna, would you be able to just talk into the mic?
Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falcon.
Polly, you want to introduce yourself? Tell us what you're doing.
Polly Trottenberg, New York City DOT Commissioner. Welcome to an extremely timely debate on congestion pricing.
Good evening. I'm Nicole Gelinas of the Manhattan Institute.
Could you please speak one more time?
Hello, my name is Richard Brodsky.
We all good?
You can do what?
Hi. See you again today.
You're a little bit taller than our others, so you're a bit further away from the microphone.
Hello, my name is Richard Brodsky. No problem.
Okay.
All right, we are happy with this.
Okay,
I'm gonna
good.
Show you the iPad, but before we do it, just very quickly.
Show me the
Yeah.
iPad?
I'm gonna show Polly. You don't have to worry about it. So Polly will invite you up. Be Nicole opening, Richard response, Nicole rebuttal.
5 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. You each get a 5-minute opening statement, a 3.
Check 1 2. Check 1 2. 1 2. Check 1 2. Check check.
Mic test. 1 2 3. Mic test. 1 2 3. This one is. Mic
Okay.
test. 1 2 3.
It could also be the way that I'm
Mic
speaking.
test. 1 2 3.
What about me? Do I sound okay? Okay, I was just speaking very softly, so I don't want.
Hello. Welcome to Debates of the Century. Please take your seats and silence your cell phone. The program is about to begin. Hello. Welcome to Debates of the Century. Please take your seats and silence your cell phone. The program is about to begin.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I am Sherry Gleed. I'm proud to be the Dean of NYU Wagner's Graduate School of Public Service and to welcome all of you here. Several years ago now, my goodness, it's, I don't know how many already, 3, 4? We created the Debates of the Century series with the Century Foundation. We bring thoughtful, informed dialogue from diverse perspectives on vital issues to our setting here. And over the past 3 years, we've held 10 debates. Education, national security, immigration, policing, gentrification, universal income, but we've never done a transportation debate before. And so we clearly have found our mark because this is a really big group here. We are thrilled to continue. Here at NYU Wagner, we've been for over 80 years helping our students translate their passion into action that really makes a difference for populations around the world, a lasting impact on the public good. And our students make a real impact every day in healthcare and international development, in urban planning, need I say transportation, nonprofit management, finance, and many other fields. One of the ways I think that we help to educate our students to make an impact is to hear all sides of a contentious issue, and that's what our conversation is about tonight. Tonight's discussion will focus on a potential solution to a problem that probably all of you, unfortunately, know too well, our struggle with overcrowding and a deteriorating transit infrastructure. How many people's trains were on time coming here today? Traffic gridlock, and so on. The challenges are reaching crisis levels, and congestion pricing is one of the ideas that's being touted as a viable solution, gaining support from city officials, advocates, the governor, and today, in preparation for our debate, no doubt, the mayor, who has embraced the idea. So today's debate will focus on whether New York City should implement congestion pricing, and I am very pleased to welcome our debaters as they present their arguments on this topic. We may not agree on what is the right thing to do, but I think we will all agree that the debate itself is valuable. So our moderator today, we are very pleased, is Commissioner Polly Trottenberg, and our debaters are Nicole Jelinas and our own Richard Brodsky. Did I pronounce that wrong? Okay. Gelinas? Jelinas, okay. They will receive proper introductions shortly, but on behalf of NYU Wagner and the Century Foundation, we thank you for being a part of the debate and sharing your insights. Welcome to everyone online. Hi. When we first began discussing this debate series with the Century Foundation, we really wanted it to be interactive and to hear from you, the audience. So there are ways that you can participate in today's conversation and ask questions. Number one is Twitter. And number two, for those of you who don't tweet, it's old-fashioned index cards, which are being passed out. For Twitter, you submit a question using the hashtag DOTC, which you will see in your programs and on the screens. Or you can write it on an index card. Raise your hand at any time during the debate, and somebody will bring you an index card. They have a lot of extra ones if you didn't pick one up when you checked in. Now, before we start, we want to take your pulse about tonight's topic. So we're going to conduct a poll right now, and then we'll do another one after the debate to see if people's opinions have changed. You can join the poll in one of two ways. You can join via text. Simply text DOTC to 37607. You can also join from any web browser. Go to pollev.com/DOTC and follow the prompts. You don't have to register or log in. We will not track what you wrote. I'll give you all a second to join the poll through text or your browser. Instructions are also on the screen. Do you see, everybody see it? Okay, you ready? Let's poll. Tonight's resolution is New York City should implement congestion pricing. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? After you've joined the poll, simply text yes, no, or undecided. And let's see what happens. We will do another poll at the end of the debate to see if our experts were able to sway anybody's opinions. So it's now my pleasure to turn, well, you can keep voting. It's now my pleasure to turn the stage over to our partner in this endeavor. Please welcome President of the Century Foundation, Mark Zuckerman.
Thank you. It's great to see you all tonight. A great turnout here. On behalf of the Century Foundation, I want to welcome you to the 11th Debates of the Century. First, a big thank you to the teams at the Century Foundation and Wagner who organized tonight's event, and special thanks to our thought partner and friend and leader, Dean Sherry Gleed. And of course, a special thank you to our wonderful debaters and moderator who you will meet in just a few moments. I want to tell you just a little bit about the Century Foundation. At a time when the focus in politics is too much about the loudest voices in the room, the Century Foundation delivers thoughtful, evidence-based policy leadership with a purpose. Our approach is simple: to sweat the details, doing the hard work today to ensure policy progress for tomorrow. And we've had a lot of practice at this. We're celebrating our 100th anniversary this year. And to help mark this special occasion, we announced last week the creation of a new, one-of-a-kind pop-up think tank called Next 100. The aim of Next 100 is to put a new generation of leaders in the driver's seat of policy change, especially in the run-up to the 2020 presidential election. To get started, we're looking to hire a half a dozen policy entrepreneurs to help build this new think tank from scratch and to begin translating policy ideas into action. If any of you all in the room here are interested in this or know of others who might be interested in this, all the details are at thenext100.org. I want to give a shout out to Next 100 Executive Director, Emma Videra, who's here with us right here in the front row. Hey, Emma. Tonight, of course, we're here to talk about one particular next generation policy idea, and that's congestion pricing. We are especially pleased about the serendipity of the mayor and the governor announcing a new MTA plan just today, which of course includes a major proposal on congestion pricing. Our moderator for tonight is New York Transportation Commissioner Polly Trottenberg, who knows a whole bunch about this topic, and we're honored to have her here tonight. Commissioner Trottenberg leads one of the nation's largest and most diverse municipal transportation agencies with 5,000 employees and a $14.5 billion 10-year capital plan. Responsible for overseeing New York's roads, bridges, parking, passenger ferry service, bicycle, pedestrians, infrastructure, Commissioner Trottenberg has maintained the agency's strong focus on safety, equity, sustainability, and economic growth. Last year, Governing Magazine honored her work on Vision Zero by naming her one of the top 10 public officials in the nation for her, quote, bold vision for making New York City roads safer by reducing roadway fatalities and injuries. Polly has 24 years experience in the public sector, including most recently at US DOT, where she served as the Undersecretary of Transportation for Policy in the Obama administration. Now, Polly has one other title that I love even more. She is also my dear wife. Let's give Polly a warm welcome to the stage.
He can still make me blush. Thank you, honey. That was a lovely introduction. And obviously, I want to thank Dean Gleed and the NYU team and the Century Foundation team for hosting tonight's debate. I've been to a bunch of these debates, and they've been terrific. And I have to say, wow, is this debate timely? I can see by the packed room, and I see a lot of friends and colleagues, advocates and experts on this topic. Obviously, as you've heard, the mayor and the governor today came together on a joint city and state congestion pricing proposal, including also some suggestions on reform for MTA. And I think the next stop, as we all know, this is being debated up in Albany in the course of the budget. So this is a really timely moment to have this discussion. And I think a lot of you know congestion pricing and the issue of congestion is a long-standing issue in New York City. Over a decade ago, the Bloomberg administration pursued what was the first real congestion pricing effort. And this year, again, we'll be debating it as part of the budget. We'll see what happens. I think a lot has changed since the Bloomberg years. As some of you may remember, when the Bloomberg administration pursued this, at that time it was actually the Bush administration, and they had put hundreds of millions of dollars on the table to encourage jurisdictions to look at congestion pricing. Now, in New York, there was a fair amount of resistance that occurred, and obviously we're going to hear from one of the leaders in that resistance, former Assemblymember Richard Brodsky, and it was a tough sell. And to be fair, no other city actually did full cordon congestion pricing either, even with those financial incentives on the table, but New York probably got the closest. And I think, as a lot of you know, the things that motivated the city in the debate back then, they're even more true today. I mean, one thing I know a lot in my job, as you've heard from my dear husband, as someone who oversees the roads of New York, congestion is one of the toughest issues we've got in New York right now. Average speeds in Manhattan are about 7 miles an hour, down about 20% just from 2010. And I think, look, we're going to hear from some experts tonight, but it's no secret the MTA is suffering from tremendous financial shortfalls and a lot of organizational, institutional issues. Obviously, in Albany, it's a very exciting time right now. We've got some new faces there. You've got a governor and a mayor now looking at this proposal, and so there seems to be a lot of momentum. But I also think we know, and we're going to hear from an Albany expert, one would be careful not to prognosticate about what's going to happen up in Albany. It's not over till it's over, and we'll see what debate brings us. But tonight, I think we're going to have a great chance to hear from experts and to take all your questions. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to introduce our two really phenomenal speakers. First of all, Nicole Gelinas will be speaking for the motion. New York City should introduce congestion pricing. I think a lot of people in this room probably know Nicole and her work. She's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. She writes regularly in the New York Post. She also contributes to the City Journal and a number of other publications. She is, I think, one of the smartest and most insightful writers on transportation and a lot of other issues. I can always say in my job, in my office, we often see one of her columns, even ones where she's skewering us, and we have to admit, Nicole really got it right. So we are really lucky to have her here. Welcome, Nicole. Speaking against, as I said, former Assemblymember Richard Brodsky, also I would say another intellectual heavyweight, someone who graduated from Brandeis Harvard Law School and was known in his 28 years of service in the state legislature as a legislator of uncommon energy and intellect. He chaired a number of important committees, the Environmental Conservation Committee, Oversight, and then most recently the committee that oversees the MTA, corporations, authorities, and commissions. And he became a deep expert in tackling some of those structural issues at the MTA. He was, it's no secret, one of the lead opponents in the effort to stop Bloomberg's initial congestion pricing proposal, but he wants to know, he's worked on a number of proposals, pro and con. He was also behind helping to kill Mayor Bloomberg's effort to get a jet stadium. He's also, like Nicole, a prolific writer. He is a senior fellow here at the NYU Wagner School, writes for the Times-Union, and I also see him quite often, probably a lot of you do on New York One, where he's a wise guy sharing his wisdom. So let us welcome up Assemblymember Richard Brodsky. All right, the format for tonight. Each speaker will get to give a 5-minute opening statement. They will each get to do a 3-minute rebuttal of each other. I will ask a couple of questions, and then we are going to toss it open to the audience. And at the end, we will again take the test and see if anyone was swayed. Okay, so we will start with you, Nicole.
Good evening. I want to thank the commissioner, thank former Assemblyman Brodsky, and hopefully he won't mind if I call him Richard as we start to argue back and forth, and also thank Mark of the Century Foundation and Sherry of NYU Wagner. Thank you very much for having me. Well, yes, I'm going to argue to you that New York should implement congestion pricing on this fortuitous day when we got one step closer. And I'm going to argue that we should implement congestion pricing because we've actually already had congestion pricing here, and we've had it for 50 years. If you go back to 1969, this was the year that Mayor John Lindsay declared that the Lower Manhattan Expressway was dead and gone for all time. This, of course, many of you know, was a decades-long fight to build an interstate highway across Lower Manhattan and essentially obliterate Soho and all of these multi-million-dollar condos that we have here today, and obliterate neighborhoods such as Little Italy, what was beginning to become Chinatown, and so forth. So once Lindsay made that announcement, we have not built any more road space within New York City. That's it, we're done. We're not making any more roads. We decided that 50 years of the automobile age, from right after World War I up until 1969, in terms of the city's policy being, we are going to build more roads to meet demand, that had not worked out very well. So now we've had 50 years of the post-automobile age. And of course, inconveniently for the post-automobile age, there are a lot of automobiles on the road, but ignoring that for the moment, what has happened in the past 50 years, and in the last 30 years in particular, New York has become enormously successful again. As the commissioner noted, we have a record number of jobs, record tourists, record number of residents in the city. We are now bringing more people into Manhattan every day than we ever have. More than 4 million people come to Manhattan on an average business day. That's almost 1 million more people than the number of people who came in 1981. How are we bringing 1 million more people into Manhattan every day when we haven't built more road space, and in fact, we've taken some road space away? We've done it through the miracle of the mass transit system. If you look at how people come into Manhattan, back in 1981, 7 out of 10 people coming into Manhattan were taking mass transit. Today, 8 out of 10 people coming into Manhattan are taking mass transit. If we had not started to rebuild the MTA in the early 1980s, we would have a much bigger crisis on the streets in terms of traffic management than we have today. I mean, it would be like we had a transit strike every day, or at least half a transit strike. But the reality would be we wouldn't have the crisis because we just wouldn't be able to support these jobs and population and tourists and so forth. So how did we rebuild the MTA? We did it with congestion pricing. If you go back to the late 60s, 1968 again, the state started to take the surpluses from the Triborough bridges and tunnels. If you go over Triborough Bridge, Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, and so forth, you pay more than it costs to operate and upkeep that infrastructure. Triborough had tremendous surpluses, still has tremendous surpluses. That surplus money goes to the MTA to fund the transit part of the MTA. The MTA now takes in $600 million in surplus from road users to pay for mass transit. This is essentially congestion pricing. You are charging drivers a higher rate than they would pay if it was just to break even, and you are putting that money toward transit to keep people off the roads. You are pricing something to prevent congestion. The other aspect of congestion pricing that we already have is a petroleum business tax, and I'll stop in a moment. Petroleum business tax implemented in the early 80s by the state legislature. also brings in $600 million for the MTA. So this latest iteration of congestion pricing that came out today, the governor and the mayor support a cordon toll below 61st Street. The price and details hopefully will become clearer later. This is not a radical new step for New York. It is just the natural evolution of what we have been doing for half a century, taxing a behavior that we want to see less of, which is driving, so that we can fund a behavior that we want to see more of, which is the most efficient way to get people into Manhattan and around the city elsewhere, a more efficient way to move people around, but which also costs quite a bit of money. And I'll stop there, and thank you all for listening.
All right, well, turn it over to Richard.
Well, let me begin by thanking the Century Fund and NYU for hosting civic discourse. Remember those days when that was not an absent fact in our public lives? I'm delighted to be with Commissioner Trottenberg and especially with Nicole, who's a fierce and effective advocate for right-wing policies, a fierce and relentless advocate for right-wing policies that I do not share, but I admire her intensely for her passion and her skills. The proposition before the House is, shall the city implement congestion pricing? It should not. It should not for reasons that implicate individual failures of the proposal. It is arbitrary, it is unfair, it has all the defects of politics and none of the virtues of a coherent, well thought out plan. It is submitted in the budget, which is a strong arm tactic known to Albany well. It has not been vetted, and those defects will be a subject of discussion shortly. But the real reason that this fails to meet the simplest test is it's profoundly regressive and unfair. Once we begin to price access to public goods on a flat fee basis, we have adopted, again, a Boris Johnson notion that the marketplace shall drive behavior, decisions, and policies. I have never thought that was the best way to solve important problems. I opposed the value-added tax for the same reasons I opposed congestion pricing. I opposed flat fees for the use of public facilities, user fees, for the same reason I opposed congestion pricing. I opposed sales taxes for the same reason I opposed congestion pricing. Principles are not hard to live by when they work your way on a particular policy. When they interfere with a perceived good or a perceived goal, they become difficult to accept. It seems to me that what we ought to be asking from government everywhere is, if you have principles, live by them. And a progressive tax based upon an understanding of what we in the elite do that affects the lives of the poor masses, that is what we are called upon to judge today. Take the issue, the related issue of a carbon tax. A flat sales tax on a good intended to change behavior and raise money. To the credit of the proponents of carbon taxes, they've now decided to amend those proposals to include what they call a dividend, so that the impacts are not socially unfair to working and poor people. It is the owner of the Chevrolet who won't be able to afford the $12. You think the hedge fund manager with the black car sitting outside Goldman Sachs is going to have a hard time coming up with an extra $12? Whose behavior do you think you will change? I submit to you that the answer to that question is, we have decided that for good or bad reasons, we will modify access to the core of the greatest city in the world based upon ability to pay. That violates a central principle of my public life and should not be done here. It should not be done here because there are other better ways to do it. We will have time momentarily to discuss the individual arbitrary and unfair qualities here. But if you remember, it was George Bush who started promoting this. It was Boris Johnson who decided that that's what we were going to do in London. Progressives should find a way to raise revenue from broad-based taxes that have a progressive impact on the people who pay the fees. Thank you very much.
All right, we will turn it back to Nicole for a 3-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. That 10% is dear to me.
Thank you, Richard. And I just want to respond to 2 points that Richard made. You said that a congestion tax or congestion pricing fee would be arbitrary and unfair and would essentially curtail access to the core part of the city based on people's ability or inability to pay. But if you look at how people access the city and access Manhattan in particular, very few poorer people are relying on a car to drive to work on a regular basis within Manhattan. Community Service Society, which advocates for poorer people, and so certainly would have a stake in saying if this was a terrible policy, says that only 2% of poorer outer borough residents drive regularly into Manhattan to work. And I would make another point on this topic, which is that if a poorer person or middle class person is relying on a car to go to Manhattan to work, where are they parking? They have to pay for parking. The parking lots already use congestion pricing. So if you want to rent space in a garage anywhere below 60th Street, you're going to pay $350 to $500 a month for a parking space. Even if you're going to pay for metered parking on the street, first of all, there's not very much of it below 60th Street. It's been taken away over the decades precisely to manage the traffic problem. But it's actually going to be pretty expensive. I mean, you're going to be paying $30, $40 a day in some parts of core Midtown. And so the answer here is not, do we want to make it cheaper for the very few poorer and not a much greater number of middle class people? Only 4% of residents of the outer boroughs who are not poor take a car regularly into Manhattan. Or do we want to build better and more expansive mass transit so that people who are relying on a car, and again, very few people percentage-wise, don't have to pay $500 a month to park in Manhattan? Or conversely, if they don't have to have a car at all, it costs $8,500 a year in this country to own and operate a car, whereas it costs only $1,700 a year to take the subway regularly. So if you are a poorer or even a middle class person, $8,500 versus $1,700 is an enormous burden, and it is only because of our extensive mass transit system that we are able to take away that burden for most people who are not billionaires in the city. I mean, most people of average and lower incomes, and even of upper incomes, are not relying on a car on a day-to-day basis to get into Manhattan. And I just want to mention very briefly another point that you made. Why should we impose a flat fee where a millionaire or a billionaire, he doesn't mind paying $12 to access core Manhattan? And you're certainly right about that. A $12 fee is not very much for the ultra wealthy, but the billionaire is not creating any more congestion than someone who is earning less than that and driving a vehicle into the city. Both people's cars or trucks are causing the same amount of congestion, and it is good policy for the city to remove both of those vehicles if one of those trips is a trip that could be taken on another mode of transit, if a fee is going to direct people to use the subways instead of the streets, which has certainly worked in London and Stockholm and elsewhere. Getting congestion off the streets means that a working person, a home health care aide who is taking a bus to work is not stuck in this same traffic. Thank you.
All right, Richard.
Well,
We'll give you a little more than 3 minutes.
I'm against
Sorry.
congestion. And I think there are ways to do it. But the notion that there are so few poor people, where are you going to get the $1 billion from? Who's going to pay that? And the notion that this is only about the poorest of the poor is not true. There are middle-income people who also deserve to be treated by their government with a sense of fairness about how we raise revenues. The core issue here is whether we believe in progressive taxation. If we do, we can find a way. You could actually find a modified congestion system that took that into consideration. No one has suggested it because let me say this politely. I note no great concern for the health of the people who will be most affected by this, by the people most actively proposing it in government. In my rebuttal, I do want to take time to point out some of the specific failures of this proposal, the arbitrary nature, the things they do that are unprincipled. Did you know that after struggling for 30 years to get a State Environmental Quality Review Act, this proposal is exempted by law from having to comply with SECRA? Did you know that if you take certain favored roadways from certain favored neighborhoods, your congestion fee will be reduced by the amount of toll you pay? But if you take others from disfavored neighborhoods or disfavored modes of transportation, you don't get that discount. Did you know that nobody has told you how much the fee is going to be? What? Excuse me? Vote for the fee, and I'll tell you Tuesday what it's going to be? If you're serious about this, there are such significant failures and unanswered questions about the proposal that, principle and policy aside, you can't pass this thing.
All right, well, with that rebuttal, I'd like to ask a couple questions, and just to key off something a couple of you said. I think 3 issues I want to make sure we get to tease out today. More on the virtues of congestion pricing as a way of reducing congestion, as a funding mechanism, and then as you've sort of raised, the governance and mechanics questions. And so let's start with the governance and mechanics question, because I think, and everyone hopefully got it as you walked in the door if you haven't already seen it today online. The proposed mayor and governor 10-point kind of general plan on what they think a framework of congestion pricing should look like. It touches upon, I think, all 3 of those areas, but would like to get both your takes on that. We'll start with you, Nicole.
Well, I think the plan that the governor and the mayor put out today, the good news is it is much better than the first proposal that the governor put out about a month ago. And I think that's not unexpected. The governor's first proposal was obviously a negotiating stance where effectively the tri-borough entity of the MTA would have been in charge of deciding where to put the congestion zone, how to build out all of this infrastructure on the city streets, and that would have effectively meant the city is losing control of its streets to the state. I mean, the state could have said, we're going to have a $50 toll on Fifth Avenue, and the city would have had no say in that. So that proposal, thankfully, is gone, and I think the process has worked so far in that the governor has heard some of these concerns and modified the proposal. I think what's still missing is that some of this money should go to keeping up the roads and bridges. In previous plans, including the Bloomberg plan and the Sam Schwartz Move New York plan, the congestion pricing was supposed to raise roughly $1.5 billion. About a third would go to upkeep of the city's roads and bridges, which makes sense because they are generating the revenue. This proposal doesn't have that, but hopefully we will see some of the state senators and state assembly people proposing something like that. So it's still an early stage, but it is much improved from a month ago.
Well, let me take a minute to tell you what's in the 10-point plan and what's not, and why it happened, in my judgment. In the initial proposal, the monies generated from congestion pricing were to go into a lockbox for projects approved in the MTA capital plan. That's no more the case, because the MTA capital plan included money for Long Island Railroad and Metro North. In this plan, it goes all to the subways. Now, that can be, in the view of some, a good idea. But the notion that you're going to tax people, this is what I mean by arbitrary. You're going to tax people from all over to spend money in just one place, raise it. I've been told to speak into the mic. The notion that you're going to raise money from all over and spend it just on enough to get the mayor's signature on a document, I don't know. I wasn't born yesterday. And more importantly, the requirement so powerfully expressed by the governor that the city had to come up with money, it's gone. So what happened was there was a trade made. Put all the money into the subways, and you don't have to pay anything else for mass transit. What it didn't change is the fact that if you drive the FDR, you don't have to pay, but if you drive the West Side Highway, you do. It doesn't change the fact that the cause of the increase in congestion that the commissioner mentioned in the last 10 years, Uber and Lyft, they pay $2.50. The rest of us are going to be paying $12. Those sorts of arbitrary distinctions between those who caused the problem argue strongly against Nicole's earlier point that you should be judged for the trouble you cause and treated equally on that basis. This plan, whatever you think of the principle, is arbitrary, unfair to certain people, favors other people, and needs, at best, a thorough redoing before we can go forward with it.
Well, attention will turn to Albany next, and I can't resist. I mean, obviously, you were a legislator up there for 28 years. Nicole, you've been a keen observer of Albany as well. Can you make some predictions now about where the debate goes next? The mayor and governor have put a proposal out, but that's sort of an opening bid, as you know.
Me?
You.
A lesson in Albany. If the governor puts policy in the budget, the legislature has no constitutional authority to change it. It's called Silver v. Pataki. It is a scandal. It's worthy of Putin and the Saudi regime. But that's the way the constitutional structure and budgeting works. If the governor insists on this, it's going to go forward. If rationality prevails, there'll be some changes or it'll be rejected and alternatives will be found. Let me point out that the other thing that got added to the mix today was, in addition to the regressive flat fee, they're going to use a regressive tax on marijuana and a regressive sales tax on internet usage to fund the rest of the program. At what point do progressives say it's enough? You cannot go forward with a rejection of broad-based taxes on the wealthy without at least a fight. Where's Elizabeth Warren when we need her?
All right, Nicole, and I would say before you speak, Nicole, I hope someone will pass me up some index cards with questions. I'm not getting that much here on the iPad, so bring some of those on up. Nicole, what's your prediction in Albany?
I know not to make predictions about Albany, so I
Fair.
will wait and see what happens. But I want to respond to the issue of progressive taxation. If you favor progressive taxation, which I think most people do, the good news is that you are in the right state. New York has a very progressive tax system. The top tax rate on high earners within the state, a couple earning over $2 million a year, is just short of 9%. The local tax is just short of 4%. So if you are in the top echelons of New York State, you are paying a 13% income tax. And we've had a temporary tax on the wealthy for 10 years now, a temporary tax that the governor wants to extend for a few more years, and that the legislature seems about to go along with. But the revenue from that temporary tax, those last 2 points that brought it up from a little less than 7% to a little less than 9% during the financial crisis, that money does not go to transit. It is already spoken for education funding, for mental health support services, for general health care costs, for housing investments, for economic development investments. All of that money is already budgeted for and effectively spent. So if the state wants to have a discussion about whether it wants to spend some of that money on mass transit rather than the marijuana tax, the internet sales tax, and so forth, I think that's fair enough.
Where would you stand on that?
I'm not gonna get into the details of the marijuana tax. I don't think it's very good, but it doesn't have very much to do with congestion pricing. But the issue of progressive taxation, if people are paying 13% already, do we really want to risk increasing it to 15, 17%, be far outlying our neighboring states? Because we have no idea yet how wealthier people are going to react to the Trump tax law and the fact that it caps people's ability to deduct these taxes from their federal taxes. It is more prudent to wait and see how that works before we think about raising that tax rate. And another final point is that it doesn't address congestion. Half of congestion pricing, the purpose is to address congestion. A higher millionaire's tax it wouldn't fix the congestion issue and allow a person on the bus to get to his or her job more quickly.
The fact that we're losing to Trump in Washington doesn't mean we have to surrender as a matter of principle on the issue of progressive taxation. I would prefer to smack the investment bankers and to smack the guy in Queens who has to come in at 2 in the morning to work as a nurse at a hospital. If that's the choice you're giving me, but it's not the only choice. And more importantly, I've learned politically that it's not time to surrender yet. And if indeed there comes a time when someone makes a good faith effort to negotiate something that has a more progressive outcome than what's currently in this hodgepodge, I'll see you in the room, but not yet.
But when you say a person coming in from Queens at 2 a.m., the magical thing about congestion pricing is the rate can be variable depending on the congestion. So if there is no congestion at 2 a.m., it could potentially be free at that time to come in.
I withdraw 2 a.m. and I substitute 2 p.m.
Well.
All right, I'm going to actually jump in on something Nicole said, because she mentioned there is the revenue raising component to congestion pricing, but there is the congestion fighting part of congestion pricing. And I guess I will interject here on a personal note. When I started in this job 5 years ago, the number one thing people screamed to me about was potholes. I'm happy to say we did a lot of road repairs. I don't hear so much about potholes. I hear a lot about congestion. And I think some of you know we have tried at the city level a bunch of different experiments with ways to tackle congestion. I don't think we've had a lot of luck, just to be honest about it. And so, particularly, I think I'll turn to Richard, but then back to Nicole. I mean, the other part of this proposal is the congestion fighting part. How do you do that if you don't start to better price what is an incredibly precious resource, obviously, which is road space?
Well, now let me give this answer without being booed. I'm asking for a favor here. Okay?
No booing, audience.
I don't mean what I'm about to say. If congestion were your first concern, you want to move the cars, I'd rip out the bike lanes. But that's...
You can boo, you can boo.
You're not a nice group. But that's not my position. That's not my position. I don't want to see the bike lanes ripped out. I want to point out that you balance things. And the way to deal with congestion, if you're going to do it, is to ask yourself a question which no one has an answer to. What's causing the increase in congestion? Why do we have the increase in the last 10 years? I asked the commissioner, who was not a participant.
I mean, I gave a little bit of that answer in my intro. The city's population has grown by over close to 1 million people in like the past 15 years. The rise of Uber, Lyft, of e-commerce, of Amazon, of Fresh Direct. I know you will disagree. We have done a lot of Vision Zero and bike lane work in the city. We try very hard when we do it to make improvements in terms of signal timing and turn lanes to minimize the traffic impacts. That's a whole separate debate, but I think it's largely been growth. The city is growing and booming, which is great news. Tourism, population, job growth.
I know the population's up. I don't know the car ownership is. That's number one.
Car ownership is up. Car ownership is up.
I accept your superior knowledge here. But somebody should do the damn study.
Well, we've done some of the damn studies, and I want to sort of make an interesting point, keying off what Nicole said. Car ownership actually, for many years it was pretty flat, and then actually, unfortunately, in the past few years, car ownership in the city started to go up again. We think really because of Uber and Lyft. But a point that Nicole made is a very important one. The number of cars crossing into Manhattan has been flat for years. The congestion that you're seeing in the central business district of Manhattan, it is really the Uber, Lyfts, the Amazons, the pedestrians. We actually have such booming tourism now. We have a lot of people on the streets.
I'm not sure I understand. Are you suggesting that the cause of congestion in the zone is Uber, Lyft, basically, fundamentally?
we have
It's a whole, but it's a
Then
whole.
do something about that.
Well, we did do something about that. But then that gets into, and I shouldn't talk too much because I'm only the moderator, but that gets into a little bit of the cycle that we've seen in recent years, which is that the MTA has struggled. Subway ridership in a terrible trend. Subway ridership, after being on the rise in the city, as Nicole pointed out, used to be, what was it you said, 7 in 10 people came in by subway 20 years ago. Now it's 8 in 10. For years, the growth, the economic growth in the city was being accommodated by the subways past few years. And not just in New York, by the way. This is happening in all the big sister cities. Chicago, San Francisco, they're all facing this. Transit ridership has started to turn around. And a lot of the experts who've looked at it have seen that those trips are being largely replaced with Uber and Lyft trips.
If we had 50,000 registered for hire vehicles, taxis, black cars, back in 2010, and today we've got 135,000 for hire vehicles. So we have almost tripled the number of these cars on the road. And they do congregate in Manhattan because that is where the short trips are. If you stand out on Park Avenue, you see all the Ubers lined up at 5 o'clock just to take people over a few blocks to the east. And potentially in a more developed congestion pricing plan, which again, in some ways, it's good that this plan isn't developed so that we can all provide input into what the state legislature comes up with. A metered congestion charge that would impose a very high price on these within Manhattan trips would start to address that issue. And I would say getting rid of the bike lanes would actually not improve congestion.
I'm not for getting rid of the bike lanes.
I know. Yeah, I know, but it wouldn't.
I had to get everybody's attention.
It wouldn't fix the congestion problem anyway, because if you look at where the bike lanes are, 8th Avenue, 9th Avenue, these avenues still have 4 full lanes of traffic throughput. These are effectively half of an interstate highway. If 5 lanes wasn't enough, then 6, 7, 8, 10 lanes would not be enough. And so we're getting back to, do we want all of this road space to belong to inefficient cars? And when you think of who is using the bike lanes, a person who is delivering food to an office worker, to a Manhattan resident, they are engaged in commerce just as much as the banker who is taking a car, and they also deserve their own safe space to get back and forth and do their jobs.
You nailed me to the floor on the bike lanes. Okay, and I deserve it. But let us see if I can go to the heart of this. Both my opponents, oh, I'm sorry. Posit that the problem is Uber and Lyft. And they then posit that the solution is to put a tax on the guy coming in from Queens.
But the congestion plan, that fee is not going to stay at $275. That fee is certain to go up, and depending on how it all works out, the magical thing about this again is that we can see how this works and adjust it according to how it's working. If a $12 fee is not deterring Uber and Lyft rides within Manhattan, you could increase that fee until you start to deter
Why don't we
it.
do that now? Why don't we just make it $60 and end the debate?
Well,
if that's the goal,
let's
adjust. Adjust is another word for raising it to $60.
Let's put a couple facts on the table about the Uber and Lyft, because I think some of you in this room may remember actually the first year Mayor de Blasio was in office, he proposed actually capping the number of Uber and Lyfts on the streets. He got his head handed to him, I can generously say. But a few years later, 1, as congestion was rising on the city streets, and 2, as we saw, and speaking of working people, that in the regular yellow taxi medallion industry, populated largely by working class immigrant New Yorkers, a spate of suicides of people who felt they were really being put out of business. The city council came back. There is now a cap. The numbers are too high, but there is a cap on Uber and Lyft, and actually DOT and the Taxi and Limousine Commission are working, as now Albany is going to be debating congestion pricing writ large. We are also at the city level looking at potential solutions. So
Look,
not to say nothing is being done on that score.
If I left that impression, I was wrong, and I apologize, but that's not my point. I was asked, well, what do you think about congestion? I answered that by saying, what's causing it? And the answer I got was Uber and Lyft. And then I point out that the solution doesn't touch that. That's the kind of arbitrary and unfair politics that have driven this debate. There is an ideological distaste for the automobile, which I kind of share. But what that brings with it is this kind of result. And there is a disconnect between my favorite movement. I chaired the Committee on the Environment. I stand by my record. But the environmental movement has never shown a great deal of initial sensitivity on issues of race and class. And this is an example of a well-intentioned, decent, thoughtful, smart elite saying, I'll fix my problem on your back. And that takes me back to the heart of the principled objection I raise, which is why, if I were asking me questions, I'd say, well, how are you going to raise the money, Richard? Which is the fair criticism of my position, not we'll solve the Uber Lyft problem by charging people coming in from Queens $12. It doesn't work and it won't work.
All right, I'm gonna shift gears for a sec. One last question for me, and then we're gonna take audience questions. So please bring me up cards if anyone has them. You have both, I think, written and spoken and been passionate experts on the question of MTA reform. Another thing that was included in the mayor and governor's 10-point plan, and something the governor has particularly been talking a lot about in this budget season, is the reforms that are needed at the MTA. And I think one of the questions is, however we might raise revenue for the MTA, there seems to be a consensus we want them to be able to spend it wisely. Give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you'll get no argument from me that the MTA should just get this new revenue source as a blank check. Every congestion pricing plan, including this one, has had serious reform proposals for the MTA. Under the Bloomberg plan, congestion pricing revenue would have gone to a new entity and been lockboxed while the Bloomberg officials overhauled the MTA cost structure. For example, one of the cost structures that can be addressed, and which was addressed in this gubernatorial mayoral agreement today, was, does the MTA really need 6 separate operating entities that were the legacy of putting a bankrupt city subway system in with 2 separate bankrupt commuter rails and a separate bus system and all the rest? Can we make one or at least fewer of these entities and consolidate a lot of the operations so it is one MTA? And frankly, the capital costs, we could talk for 3 hours about capital costs, but I think that the MTA, the state, and the city realize that these capital costs for building major projects like the 2nd Avenue subway, like East Side Access, they are multiples of what other global cities are spending to build comparable projects. These costs have to go down. The MTA says they're going to do more design build so that you have one or just a couple contracts for a project rather than having dozens of contracts for one project where all the contractors are uncoordinated. But yes, the MTA has to embark on this cost reform. It would be good in this bill to see the congestion pricing revenues lockboxed, as the MTA has to meet certain cost benchmarks every 3 months, every 6 months, every year, and not have that money dispersed on new projects until it is proven that it can perform much better than it has. But I don't think the answer can be to give up and to starve them of funding, because if the subway system really deteriorates far worse than it has over the past few years, then we're really giving up on the city.
What are the top 3 things the MTA should do to reform?
Well, procurement for perform, going to things like design build rather than doing 50 contracts like on East Side Access, and one contractor can't start work even though they're paying dozens of people $100 an hour because another contractor hasn't finished their work. And I think, frankly, although it may not fall into the area of cost reform, they have to look at the retirement benefits. The pension and healthcare benefits for the public sector workforce have basically tripled over the past 12 years. You can be in favor of these benefits, you can be against them, or you can not care about them at all, but you cannot say that they don't exist and they are not spent, they're cutting into money that would be available for capital. If you look at the healthcare costs, if people want a single-payer healthcare system, the MTA is a single-payer healthcare system, but it has not used its power to start to reform these healthcare delivery costs that it is paying, $25,000 for a healthcare plan is just not sustainable anywhere. So this is a good place to start demonstrating that we actually can cut healthcare costs and have quality healthcare. And that's two, but I'll stop with two.
All right, Richard, MTA
My
reform?
respect for Nicole knows no bounds. That doesn't stop me from saying we're going to solve the MTA, we're going to call it reform by we're cutting health care and pension benefits.
But right
Doesn't
now,
strike me as where I want to start.
But right now, we have a system where fewer and fewer public employees have benefits that people in the private sector do not have. And because they don't have them, they no longer support these benefits. Having this bifurcated system is not good for the public employees in the long term, and it's not good for the private sector employees in the long term.
With all due
There
respect,
has to be a compromise in the middle where everyone gets.
not first,
Yep.
at the end, maybe. And I'll have to be dragged.
The end is
kicking
nigh.
and screaming. No, it is not nigh. Second of all, if the question is reform of the MTA, the notion that you merge three bureaucracies into one bureaucracy is not reform. It's something, but it's not reform. I know a little bit about public authorities. I did coin the phrase Soviet-style bureaucracies, which is what they are and what the MTA is. And I'm telling you what the one reform that really would matter, keep the political class and the commissars away from the authorities that are set by statute to run these systems consistent with law. Did you notice what the mayor and the governor agreed? They agreed that the terms of the board members, who are the legally constituted authority for the MTA, shall be made co-extensive with the political terms of the mayor and the governor. Reform? At what point do you simply stand up and say, go home, have a good night's sleep, and start over, and maybe we can come up with something that reaches the values that we want to, look, we want to do something about congestion. We want to do something about revenues. We want to do something about functionality. But this plan is not it.
All right, I think we are ready to turn to some of the questions from the audience. If there are any more cards, come up. All right, there's a spicy one here I'm going to start with, Richard. I hope you'll forgive me. It's the best one I see on this list.
I do not favor removing the bike lanes.
And I do favor term limits for MTA board members, so being one myself. All right, here's a question for you. The original champions of congestion pricing in New York City were progressive heroes. Mayor John Lindsay, Nobel economist Bill Vickney, civil rights leader Ted Keel. Where do we get off calling congestion pricing a right-wing idea?
Well, it depends on what you mean by a right-wing idea. If flat taxes are your idea of progressive, then call it progressive. You know, we live in 1984. We came through it okay. You might want to try to do that. It is a flat tax irrelevant to the ability to pay. Is that progressive? And second of all, God bless Ted Keel. He wanted free subways. He probably was right. But the real architects of this were George Bush and Boris Johnson. Brexit, he just, hold on a second. Hold on. Don't move. Boris Johnson, about Brexit. There's no need for a hard border. There's no border between Camden and Westminster. But when I was mayor of London, we anesthetically and invisibly took hundreds of millions of pounds from the accounts of people traveling between those two boroughs. That's not my idea of the way you should go about this. And more importantly, if you're going to go to this in the end, exhaust the other logical, fairer, and more practical proposals that are out there. Then come to me and say, there's no other way.
So someone in the back of the room mentioned Ken Livingstone, who was, yes, the mayor of London who implemented congestion pricing there, who I don't think anyone would say was a right-winger. So I'll turn to you, Nicole. I mean, certainly I've gotten the chance to see and meet with the experts in London and Stockholm where congestion pricing is up and running. And, I think some of these questions we're debating here today, we've seen them play out in those two cities now over a number of years.
Yeah, if you look at London, congestion pricing, which is now, I guess, 16 years old, it cut traffic by 15%, and then it cut congestion, which is traffic jams, by 30%. And this enabled London to calm its traffic, which has another important effect that we haven't talked about. When you build bike lanes, when you build wider sidewalks, when you build pedestrian plazas, and you have more room to do these things because you have tamed the traffic somewhat, then you do start to reduce injuries and deaths, even more so than we have. New York had 200 traffic fatalities last year, our lowest level since we invented the automobile. And I would say that's one of the great accomplishments of the current administration and of Commissioner Trottenberg in particular, is saving lives, including saving the lives of poorer children and elderly people who were not protected by being in a large automobile. And that has happened in London. A new study by CheckPeds, which is a Hell's Kitchen Manhattan advocacy organization, extrapolates some of the numbers from London and Stockholm and says that over 2 years, New York could save another 71 lives from congestion pricing.
I share the concern about safety and congratulate the commissioner and the mayor for doing smart stuff on that. As to the policy suggestions that come with that, what you're really heading towards is something that I could live with, which is banning cars from those districts completely. That has the virtue. Come on. That's what it took to win you over? That has the virtue of treating everybody alike. And if the problems with congestion in the inner city are so powerfully unmet, think about that. At least think about it before you come to with the notion that you can buy your way out of the changes we need to make in the downtown traffic patterns.
All right, well, there was a spicy question for Richard, so now I'll have one for Nicole. Nicole, haven't you already proved the point against? We already have congestion pricing in the tolls and parking costs, and yet traffic insists. That's where you started, that we actually already have a form of it here.
Well, again, just like London, and maybe not again, because maybe I didn't say it the first time, but we have enormous demand on a finite and actually shrinking road infrastructure system. And so we've seen traffic speeds decline, but we have had this influx of 100,000 Ubers and Lyfts on these roads. We have construction sites that are taking out broad swaths of Midtown for years on end. And we have devoted more space to pedestrians, not for any ideological reason, it's just because there's an insane number of pedestrians on the streets. If you look at Times Square, some people, not all that many really, criticized Polly's predecessor, Jeanette Sada-Khan, for closing parts of Times Square to cars. But if you look at the foot traffic of people coming out of the subway stations in Times Square, in 1998, there were 40 million people a year. Now there is 62.5 million. So you've increased that pedestrian traffic by 50%. You've increased pedestrian traffic more broadly in the city by 14%. We have record numbers of whatever type of person, walker, bicyclist, Uber rider, and so forth. And of course, we have to do much better at managing it. But if we did not have the subway system that we rebuilt in part because of fuel taxes and toll taxes, we would have, again, a much bigger problem.
Reflect for a moment on what Nicole just offered us, which is that we have a scarce resource and we have enormous human demand for it. It's true. We have a scarce resource in libraries. We have a scarce resource in parks. We have a scarce resource in schools. Let's put a charge on those things and there'll be less demand for them. If you buy the market model, you are not constrained by your own particular view of a social good. The market has its limitations, and it has reached that limitation in this congestion pricing proposal. You will legitimize forces that you will never put back into the bottle, or genies. You've legitimized genies. Thank you.
But a library is a good thing. You want as many as people as possible using the library. A park is not a place where people are going to do business. It's a place where people are relaxing. The city streets are a place where various entities are doing business. And so if you don't have some kind of charge, you're not benefiting the kid that's going to the library. You're benefiting FedEx, UPS, Amazon, whose packages they are delivering. If you're looking at Amazon as the end user of a lot of what's going on in the streets, because we didn't talk about another big driver of congestion, which is 40% of New Yorkers getting a package delivered to their house regularly. Why give away a city resource to Amazon and let them use the street as a logistical staging area when the small business that they're competing with, they don't get to do that all day on the streets?
If you want to bring business into this, go get them. There are the real estate industry, the single biggest beneficiary of the subway system, pays not a French sou to solve the congestion problem. But the guy from Queens having to go in at 2 p.m., he's going to pay. There's got to be equity. They have yellow vests in France over a gas tax, which had the same effect on middle class and working people that the congestion fee will have in New York City. Pay attention, if you will, to the politics, the changing politics of the world. The left and the right, the elites on both sides, are out of touch with the way people feel they're being treated and are living. Congestion fees will be seen in the same way. And again, there are better, fairer ways. You want to do a gas tax? It's okay with me. You want to do a registration fee on automobiles based on weight and cost? It's okay with me. What I don't want to see is human beings treated as though we're going to modify the behavior of those for whom $12 is a lot of money.
All right, I will turn to another, I will turn to sort of to get at some of those fine graders. And I just, one question, in mentioning, and I've seen before, Richard, having read some of your past articles and statements, sort of the library analogy. And I'll have to confess, because I know a lot of people in this room think a lot about the issue of what is called the negative externalities. I think that is the one thing that I see a little different. People coming to use a library, there's no negative externalities there. As someone who's the DOT commissioner, when you have too many cars in the city, you do start to deal with the negative externalities: congestion, air quality, safety, et cetera. So I think those two situations aren't perfectly analogous, but let's drill down a little bit, because you were sort of, I think, getting at who would be the folks you would charge. I mean, how would you, if you're not for congestion pricing, what do you think in terms of ways we can better manage what's happening on our streets? Is there any role for pricing, for fees, for any of the sort of market-based solutions we're debating tonight?
Foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. You want to work something out that is principled but compromisable, I can do that. As to the analogy with libraries, if you think that the decision on putting a fee on libraries is going to be made by Polly Trottenberg or me, it's not. It's going to be the next Republican governor of the state of New York who's going to decide, as this governor has done, he knows what's best, or she knows what's best for the people of the city of New York. And it's not just parks, it's any social good. You're going to start pricing this stuff, you're going to have to live with the precedent you set.
But you say you might favor a gas tax or a higher gas tax instead. But a gas tax would apply to everybody, even if they weren't driving into core Manhattan. So why is something like that fair when you are raising money, again, from the person who has to spend $8,500 a year to service a car because he or she doesn't have access to a working transit system. In the rest of the country, where there really is no reliable mass transit to speak of in most places, a poorer person has this extra burden, which is essentially a flat tax and buying gasoline, buying insurance. And again, if you are driving into Manhattan for work because you don't have access to transit, you have got to pay these exorbitant parking fees. And so the best thing for that person is a better transit system.
I am justly skewered on my reasonable approach to the question I had previously been asked. I don't really like a gas tax, but I was trying to sound reasonable, which sometimes comes easy for me and sometimes doesn't. The fact of the matter is, what I meant to say is that there are an array of appropriate revenue-raising kinds of things. If I was asked my number one preference, it would be a real estate added value tax. That would be my number one. And did somebody applaud? No, somebody. But I should be held to a reasonable standard of solving the problem once I'm elected governor, which is never going to happen. Right now, the question before this House and the question before the legislature is, should they implement this bizarre, unfair, reactionary, regressive plan? That's the problem I'm here to solve. I accept my responsibility to be better than that, but not tonight.
All right, is it a regressive plan?
No, it's not a regressive plan because, again, the vast majority of poorer people and even people not so poor are on the transit system. What is a regressive plan is essentially giving up on the subways and buses, forcing more people into Ubers and Lyfts. I mean, we didn't talk about another aspect of the plan that came out today, which is better enforcement of the quality of life on the subways, where we have too many mentally ill people. They're not getting the help that they need. They are causing disturbance to paying passengers. And if I'm a wealthy or an upper middle class parent, I can choose to take an Uber and a Lyft and not subject my children to someone who's screaming on the subway, someone who may not be dangerous but may seem dangerous. If I'm a poorer or a middle class person, I can't do that. I can't afford to take a car a few times a week. And so to the extent that wealthier people can just remove themselves from these issues, there is less attention to these issues and less impetus to solve these issues.
All right, we will take another question from Twitter. And this one, although this one might sort of be directed at me, but I'll let both of you attempt it to answer too. If we're not doing congestion pricing, how could we change the traffic flows, for example, to try and reduce congestion? What are the other sort of traffic mitigation things you could do if you're not for congestion pricing? Serious answer, not just a like, let's charge taxis $60, because I mean, I think we have to be realistic about the fact that there is a serious community of taxi drivers. They've been in a lot of financial distress, and I mean, maybe someone here is willing to put them out of business, but I don't know that that's a viable solution.
I think we can do some of these things even with congestion pricing, and a lot of what DOT is doing in timing the traffic lights better so that the buses have priority over some more of the traffic lights, in mounting cameras on every single MTA bus so that nobody is parked in the bus lane, the speed cameras and continuing to calm traffic, making sure that intersections are clear so that traffic jams don't cascade across multiple blocks of an avenue. And some of these things congestion pricing makes easier to do. If you alleviate the traffic by 10-15%, you can put more human resources. Another thing you're doing is putting more enforcement to double parking and those type of non-moving violations. But that doesn't have to be instead of congestion pricing.
I am no expert in the literature or techniques of traffic mitigation. My experience is stop the double parking. I mean, if I could do one thing, it would be to get the cops out there to move these people along, and that includes the trucks. Second thing is maybe start incentivizing truck delivery at night. I mean, it may not work, it may work, but there are ideas which could have an impact on traffic that don't involve regressive fees.
And I think that's a great idea, but congestion pricing can help do that. If it's the Saturday before Christmas and you've got 800,000 people walking by Rockefeller Center, if you absolutely have to bring in your truck that afternoon and drop off construction materials, fine, but that day the fee may be $150, whereas if you do that delivery at 2 a.m., then maybe it's free or close to free.
So I have to, I've been very involved, as a lot of you know, in the closure and now not so much of a closure of the L train. And just sort of I just want to give an interesting statistic, because I'll just give and certainly we can talk about all these traffic techniques, and my agency's done a lot of work to try and encourage off-hour deliveries. It is, of course, a lot more complicated than it looks. But here's an interesting statistic, and I'll sort of give a couple of them. So when we were looking at how we were going to mitigate potentially closing down the L train for a year and a half, we realized that the number of people who ride in the L train during the 1 hour morning rush from 8 to 9 a.m., that L train is carrying the same number of people as are being carried simultaneously over the Queensboro Bridge, the Queens Midtown Tunnel, the Williamsburg Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, and the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. I think it is a breathtaking example of how really the most efficient way to move people in this town is in subways. And just sort of an interesting another data point, when we did finally add those 3 subway stops to the 2nd Avenue subway, which took us 10 years to do, we should be doing that every year, but we did it, we looked at the traffic data and we actually saw a notice improvement in travel speeds on the Upper East Side and a reduction in the use of Uber and Lyft. So I would put another solution on the table, which is, not only did we stop building roads, Nicole, we basically stopped building subways too. And, part of, I think, what we'll just come back to sort of the other piece of this puzzle, which is raising funds for the MTA. I mean, I do have to vote that, we need to get back into the area of subway building as well. And this is partially to address that.
I agree with you.
I agree.
All right. I shall savor the moment. Okay. I think we'll actually, and we have some good audience questions, but I think it would actually be fun to end letting each of you, you two are so insightful, let each of you ask a final question of each other. I don't know, Nicole, why don't you start? And then
If Richard, an even more progressive tax system in New York State and perhaps in New York City. But is there a tax rate where you would say it's too high? What would you propose to be the top?
71%.
But at the state level, where a person who is already spending 3 months out of the year in Florida, are they going to pay 15, 17, 20? What is the rate that you would propose to effectively replace congestion pricing?
The notion that marginal tax rates are locational is one of those nostrums that has just enough to it so that people go, But it does not have a body of scientific evidence saying it's true. For example, we were told by the governor that the decrease in revenues of $2 to $3 billion in December was because people had left the state in the fourth quarter of 2018. There's no evidence of that. If you want to have a debate about where the marginal tax rate is, I'll have it with you, but based on data, not upon Steve Forbes' predictions that he's going to move to Monaco.
But New York is creating millionaires at a slower rate right now than the country as a whole. And the Trump tax law, which I disagree with, capping the state and local deductions, this is already the biggest marginal income tax hike that wealthier people have seen ever since we put in place the state and local income taxes in the late 1960s. And I am happy to wait and see how the data shape up, but it is not prudent to suddenly say, we are going to raise the rate by another marginal 2 points without seeing how people react to this.
What's my choice? If my choice is I have to fund the subways, take the risk of that 2%, or impose a congestion fee, I'll take the 2%. I don't do it gladly. I don't respond to your question in a cavalier way. There is a number sooner or later where it gets locational. No one knows what it is. And it's always been argued by our friends on the Republican right that the next tax increase is the one that's going to break the camel's back. And it's never been proven to be true.
And now you can ask me a question.
Would you vote for a congestion fee without knowing what the fee is?
Yes.
No further questions.
Yes.
Let's move on.
I would vote for it because this is going even after what Cuomo is asking for now, and I agree, I will concede the point, this can be improved, and it likely will hopefully be improved over the next few weeks. But what he is asking people to vote for is a concept that this is finite street space and it has a price that should be levied to deter people who just have never thought about it before, just like the 5-cent plastic bag fee, and to put money into the subway system. What happens after that in terms of what the fee is? Should it be higher for Uber and Lyft? Should yellow cabs be exempt for a few years because they've already paid a congestion fee? Those are also part of the political process, and politics is not going to shut down after April 1st, where if things are not working perfectly, they can't be fixed after that. So I would vote for it.
With all due respect, we do not vote for concepts in America.
Huh?
We vote for laws. You vote for a concept, and the king is the one who decides what the concept is going to be like. The notion, trust me, the fee will be reasonable.
But
Trust me, we'll do something about the fact that the RFK bridge, you don't get to remove your offset your toll fee. I spent 28 years working for peanuts on the theory that sooner or later I'd make decisions about things that matter to me, and the notion that you're going to take congestion pricing, not know the fee, vote for it and say the governor will work that out is un-American.
But we have no idea what the toll to cross the Verrazano Narrow Bridge will be 10 years from now. And we're happy with that. The world is not coming to an end. There is a range of what the congestion fee can be expected to be based on the toll prices of the competing bridges, and a history of regular increases to these tolls. And we have, again, if Cuomo were to say, okay, the legislature voted for a blank check, and Cuomo said, well, this neighborhood didn't vote for me, I'm going to levy a $200 fee, that would be re-legislated. The governor, I'm not here to stick up for how things work in Albany, and I know that this is an imperfect
sounds
process.
like you are.
But the politics in something like setting a bridge toll and raising that toll, again, this has existed for 50 years. It actually existed before that when the bridges were first built, and I'm not too worried about the mechanics of setting the toll.
I'm worried. And I'm worried because for years progressives believed in checks and balances, and the Republican conservatives more so. You can't build a wall. You can't appropriate the money without the legislature. Oh, I'll declare an emergency. And let the king decide. With all due respect, I would not vote for it, all else being equal, until someone said, here's a $2 range. It'll be between 10 and 12 bucks. Take it or leave it.
Well, I guess my pitch on the campaign trail would be I am happy to vote for this without knowing the fee. Some other things I would like to know and see fleshed out, and
Like
hopefully
what?
will. I think the issue of the panel, the governor actually did come up with at least an indication of who will appoint the people to this panel, the city, the state, and so forth. And so I think that's a little bit better, but I think we need details on who actually controls this panel in the end. But again, that's not a deal breaker for the concept of pricing finite street space and giving the money to transit.
I think we have finally joined issue at its core. Market pricing mechanisms are, in my judgment, the last resort and are not to be trusted, and bring with them incredibly undesirable social outcomes. The king is not to be trusted.
But isn't this what the supporters of Obamacare argued, that this was not a perfect bill? It did not provide what supporters wanted. And the details of it were not clear when Congress voted for it, but very few people who advocated for expanding healthcare used that as a reason to abandon the process. They saw it as an evolutionary process.
There are some things which can be put off, and there are some things like the amount of money that's coming out of my pocket I want to know now. And I think finding that balance has to be done outside the parameters of a budget process that gives the governor dictatorial powers.
All right, well, that was a great exchange, and we're going to give you a minute to compose your thoughts because you will each get a 3-minute closing statement. I will toss one more thing as we discuss who gets charged what and how you might vote. Just an interesting thing to put into your calculation since I am on the MTA board. Tomorrow on the MTA board, we're going to be voting on a fare increase. There's a whole group of people that are also paying in the city right now for their transportation, which haven't really been a part of this debate. They are not generally the highest income people, so we should also, I think, maybe in the closing just roll them in, because that's a debate, that's a vote some of us are staring at even as we speak. So I think with that, we will do closing. I think we're going to do, right, Nicole, and then Richard will close us out in the end.
Yes, Richard gets the last word, and I just want to re-thank Polly and Richard and our sponsors for hosting this, I hope, substantive debate. I just want to go back to the point that the idea of charging people to drive a vehicle is not an outlandish, radical, new idea. And even if we come back to core Manhattan, 35% of the people who drive into core Manhattan are already paying a congestion fee. If you are unlucky enough to live geographically closer to an MTA tolled bridge or tunnel, if you live in New Jersey, and we have enough problems without talking about New Jersey, but you are paying to cross the Hudson River. A substantial plurality of people are already paying effectively to drive into Manhattan. But right now we have a random system where we have these free East River bridges, and many people go out of their way to avoid paying the toll and drive over one of these free bridges. And in some cases, truck traffic goes across Lower Manhattan to go across the one-way tolled Verrazano. The trucks that don't even have any business in Manhattan, but that cause traffic, pollution, congestion, and danger to pedestrians across Canal Street and Houston Street. So I think it's important to take a step back and say, all we are doing is rationalizing an existing system that has actually worked very well for half a century.
She's concise.
She is, and knowledgeable. Let me conclude by thanking NYU and the Century Fund. Where'd you go? For really, I had a hell of a time. I don't know about you. And I commend to my colleague and opponent and to the commissioner the notion that civil discourse, even spirited and edgy discourse, is still possible. And now, I turn to you, voters, all, each, with the responsibility of casting a vote. And to do so, absent what I had to do, I had to take an oath. And you know, it mattered. I compromised. I did things wrong, and I knew I was doing things wrong on more than one occasion. Not immoral, things I didn't actually believe were right, for political reasons. Okay, there is a place for politics and compromise. But if you're a progressive and you want to solve problems of finance and social problems like congestion, you can't walk from the core economic values because it's expedient or because it targets a group that you don't much care about. And if I have failed to be persuasive on that, I ask you to think about voting for a fee without knowing what it is. I ask you to consider why you would vote yes on abandoning the State Environmental Quality Review Act. It is not a sign of having lost your commitment to change and a better society to say, This is not the idea, and even if it is, this is not the iteration of that idea that should be supported today, tonight, whatever. I start with a very low threshold. I got 10% going in. All I'm suggesting to you is do as you want your elected representatives in Albany and Washington to do. Do what you think is right and principled and take the consequences as best as they can. I conclude with a genuine expression of gratitude for the fairness with which my minority view was received tonight. And I finally conclude by pointing out, once again, I don't want to see the bike lanes ripped out. Thank you all very much.
All right, I'm changing the, be it resolved, we shall not rip the bike lanes out on the streets of New York. I'm only kidding. We're going to once again do the poll, pull out your phones. We've got the instructions up here. The resolution, should New York City introduce congestion pricing? Agree or disagree? Let's let the voting begin. Let's see where we come out after this terrific debate.
Well, they went up more than people moved from favor with undecided.
All right, looks like the vote is in. Richard, you swayed a few folks and we grew some undecided. All right, I want to. All right, still jumping around a little bit. But anyways, I want to take this opportunity to thank these two fantastic debaters, Century Foundation, NYU. And thank you, a terrific audience.
Congratulations.
That was great. That was great, you guys. Oh, yeah.